What if I told you that behind the loud guitars and explosive stage acts, some of heavy metal's biggest icons were hiding scandals too wild even for rock and roll? These weren't just bad boys living fast, they were obsessed, reckless, and trapped in desires that spun completely out of control. From secret affairs that tore bands apart to shocking backstage confessions that made even the most hardcore fans blush, their lustful lifestyles became their greatest downfall. These are the heavy metal legends whose addiction to pleasure went far beyond the music. Welcome to the dark, unfiltered world of the worst sex addicts in heavy metal history. Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson wasn't just a rock star, he was the embodiment of shock, sin, and seduction. But behind the makeup and chaos lived a man completely enslaved by his own desires. Fame didn't calm him, it fueled his obsession. Every concert, every party, every dark backstage corner became another outlet for the extreme fantasies he couldn't control. His mansion turned into a playground of lust and excess, filled with groupies, bizarre rituals, and nights that blurred the line between pleasure and punishment. Manson's addiction wasn't about love or connection, it was about power, escape, and control. He fed on the danger, the shock, and the taboo, constantly pushing boundaries to feel something real in a world that had become numb. His partners often described him as unpredictable, shifting between charm and cruelty. The darker his fantasies grew, the more he lost touch with reality. It wasn't just about sex anymore, it became a twisted experiment in domination, a psychological maze of obsession. As the years passed, his behavior grew more erratic, and his relationships fell apart one by one. Behind the fame and the headlines was a man spiraling into a pit of his own making. Marilyn Manson's story isn't just about addiction, it's about how fame can turn fantasy into madness when nothing is ever enough. Scott Weiland. Scott Weiland lived fast, loved recklessly, and crashed harder than most. As the voice of Stone Temple Pilots and Velvet Revolver, he owned the stage, but off it, his world was chaos. Drugs weren't his only poison. Weiland once admitted that sex, for him, was another addiction, another escape from the emptiness that fame couldn't fix. He chased high after high, both chemical and physical, until the lines between the two disappeared completely. His hotel rooms became revolving doors of fleeting faces, each encounter an attempt to fill a void that only grew deeper. What looked glamorous from the outside was actually a life ruled by impulse and regret. The constant need for stimulation, the thrill of the forbidden, it all became part of the same destructive cycle. He wasn't seeking love or connection, just another distraction from the pain he carried inside. Friends and bandmates watched as he drowned in his compulsions, unable to break free. Even as his career crumbled, the addiction stayed. It was never about lust, it was about loneliness, buried under the noise of fame and addiction. In the end, Scott Weiland's downfall wasn't just about drugs or rock and roll, it was about the desperate need to feel something in a life that had gone completely numb. Bret Michaels. Bret Michaels didn't just live the rock star fantasy, he became the definition of it. With his signature bandana, boyish grin, and wild charm, women followed him wherever he went. But behind the glam metal glitter was a man consumed by an addiction he couldn't control. Fame made temptation constant, and for Bret, saying no wasn't an option. His tours were less about music and more about indulgence nights, blurred by flashing lights, hotel doors, and countless faces he barely remembered. During his Rock of Love reality shows, his reputation reached new heights or lows. What the cameras showed as fun and flirtation was really a deep compulsion. He craved affection, not for love, but for validation. Each conquest was a momentary fix for the emptiness that fame left behind. It wasn't about romance or passion anymore, it was survival through desire, feeding on attention to stay relevant and alive. Even when he tried to settle down, the addiction followed. Relationships fell apart because the thrill was stronger than the bond. Behind every smile and love song, there was chaos, an endless chase for something he couldn't keep. Bret Michaels' sex addiction wasn't a secret, it was a storm that fueled his fame and nearly swallowed him whole. Paul Stanley. Paul Stanley, the star child of Kiss, spent decades hiding behind his makeup on stage and off. To millions, he was the ultimate rock idol, confident, seductive, unstoppable. But behind that glitter-covered persona was a man driven by a deep, unshakable addiction to sex. In his memoir, Face the Music, Paul admitted that his desire for women became a full-blown compulsion. Every show, every city, every fan encounter was another opportunity to fill the void inside him. He wasn't chasing intimacy, he was chasing validation. Growing up insecure and lonely, the adoration of groupies gave him a sense of worth he couldn't find elsewhere. But the more he fed the addiction, the emptier he felt. The after-parties turned mechanical, the encounters meaningless. Still, he couldn't stop. It wasn't about pleasure, it was about escaping silence, drowning the insecurities behind the mask. Even as fame soared, his addiction shadowed every success. It strained relationships, ruined trust, and left him questioning who he really was when the lights went out. Paul Stanley's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the loudest performers are the ones hiding the deepest emptiness. Behind the star makeup was a man trapped in a cycle of desire and denial, searching for something fame could never give him. Steven Tyler wasn't just the voice of Aerosmith, he was the embodiment of sex, swagger, and danger. His screams shook stadiums, but his addiction screamed louder behind closed doors. Drugs and alcohol weren't his only poisons. Sex was another monster he couldn't tame. Tyler once admitted that he had a toxic hunger for pleasure, something that drove him into scandal after scandal. His lifestyle wasn't about love or connection, it was about control, thrill, and the rush of doing what no one else dared to. In his prime, he lived in a whirlwind of lust and chaos. His relationships blurred with obsession, and his partners often became casualties of his compulsive behavior. The darker side of his addiction came out in disturbing stories of underage encounters and manipulative relationships, tales that haunted his image for decades. He chased fantasy after fantasy, trying to quiet the emptiness fame left behind. Even when the drugs faded, the craving stayed. Tyler later admitted that sex had become another kind of drug, one that numbed the loneliness fame couldn't fix. It wasn't about desire anymore, it was about addiction disguised as affection. Steven Tyler didn't just live the rock star cliché, he became trapped in it, a prisoner of the pleasure he could never control. Nikki Sixx didn't just flirt with danger, he made it his lifestyle. The Motley Crue bassist was addicted to everything that could destroy him: heroin, chaos, and most of all, sex. He once described himself as a junkie for pleasure, and he meant every word. On tour, his nights blurred into a storm of drugs, women, and reckless abandon. His bandmates called it excess, but Nikki knew it was something darker, a craving he couldn't silence, no matter how much he fed it. His sex addiction wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting. He would spend entire nights lost in meaningless encounters, trying to fill the same void he once filled with drugs. The more he indulged, the emptier he felt. Even when he overdosed and came back from the edge of death, that craving didn't leave him. It controlled him. In his memoir, The Heroin Diaries, Sixx admitted that sex had become part of his self-destruction, an addiction as deadly as any drug. He sought love, but every connection was buried under lust and guilt. Even when he finally got sober, he had to face the truth. Addiction isn't always chemical. It can live inside desire. Nikki Sixx's story proved that sometimes pleasure and pain are the same thing, wearing different faces. Ozzy Osbourne was the wild heart of Black Sabbath, a man known for his outrageous behavior and complete disregard for limits. But what the world didn't see behind the madness was another addiction that quietly ruled his life: sex. Even after conquering drugs and alcohol, Ozzy confessed that he was still fighting a darker, quieter battle. His obsession with sex destroyed trust, shattered relationships, and nearly ended his marriage to Sharon, the one person who stood by him through everything. Fame gave Ozzy everything: power, attention, and endless temptation. And he took it all, without thinking twice. The thrill of being wanted became another high he couldn't live without. He cheated repeatedly, not out of desire, but compulsion. It was an endless loop of guilt and pleasure, a rush that always led to regret. By 2016, Ozzy checked himself into rehab, not for drugs or booze, but for sexual addiction, admitting it had taken complete control of his life. His honesty shocked fans, but it showed something real. Beneath the outrageous persona was a man who had lost control of himself long ago. Ozzy's addiction wasn't about pleasure, it was about pain, escape, and the curse of never knowing when to stop. He wasn't just the Prince of Darkness on stage, he was living in darkness off it too. Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons didn't just play the part of a rock god, he lived it to the extreme. As the frontman of Kiss, he built his image around sex, fame, and power. But what looked like confidence was really an obsession. For decades, Simmons bragged about sleeping with over 4,000 women, even keeping Polaroid photos as proof. It wasn't just a habit, it was an addiction that shaped his entire identity. Gene treated sex like a currency, trading intimacy for validation. Every city, every tour, every fan became another number, another memory in a long list that left him feeling more hollow than fulfilled. The man who sang about pleasure was trapped in a cycle of loneliness and need, feeding an addiction that fame made impossible to escape. Behind the bravado was emptiness, a craving that no spotlight could ever fill. It wasn't until his later years that Simmons began to confront the truth. He admitted that his behavior wasn't glamorous, it was destructive. He'd mistaken obsession for freedom, lust for power, and pleasure for happiness. Even after settling down, the shadow of his addiction lingered, reminding him that some temptations never really leave. Gene Simmons didn't just symbolize rock's wildest era, he defined what happens when desire becomes your whole identity. Tommy Lee. Tommy Lee was the wild heartbeat of Motley Crue, a drummer whose life off stage was louder than any concert. Fame didn't just bring him music, it brought him chaos, lust, and a lifestyle that blurred every boundary. For Tommy, sex wasn't just a hobby, it was an obsession that consumed every part of his life. From the moment Motley Crue exploded, he was surrounded by temptation, endless parties, groupies, and the kind of freedom that felt unstoppable. But what looked like fun soon became a dangerous pattern. His sex addiction wasn't about love or excitement anymore, it became his escape. He needed constant stimulation to fill the emptiness that fame left behind. Every night was another rush, another fix, another attempt to feel alive. His relationships with famous women became public spectacles, but behind the cameras, they were often turbulent and broken by his uncontrollable habits. Even his infamous private tapes weren't signs of confidence, they were symptoms of compulsion. Tommy eventually sought therapy to understand why he couldn't stop chasing pleasure, but the damage had already been done. His name became synonymous with chaos, proving that even fame and fortune couldn't hide an addiction that ruled his life. Tommy Lee wasn't just a rock star, he was a man addicted to the high of being wanted, and it nearly destroyed him. David Lee Roth. David Lee Roth was more than Van Halen's frontman. He was the living symbol of sex, swagger, and excess. On stage, he was electric, fearless, and untouchable. Off stage, he was unstoppable in a different way. He admitted to sleeping with thousands of women, sometimes several in a single day, and treated sex as part of his performance. Every tour stop became another chapter in his endless pursuit of desire, where the line between stage fantasy and real life disappeared completely. For Roth, pleasure became a form of addiction disguised as confidence. He wasn't just chasing physical satisfaction, he was addicted to the power it gave him. He thrived on being adored, using fame as his access pass to every temptation imaginable. But the more he indulged, the less human it all felt. It became mechanical, empty, and addictive. He once compared his experiences to being stuck in a loop, chasing a thrill that never lasted. Even years later, when the lights dimmed and fame faded, Roth admitted that slowing down wasn't easy. His obsession had shaped his entire identity. What started as rock star fun turned into dependency, a need to feel alive through the chaos of lust and adoration. David Lee Roth didn't just live the dream, he became trapped inside it. These stories remind us that even the wildest gods of rock were human, flawed, fragile, and fighting demons the spotlight could never hide. Some survived their addictions, others never truly escaped, but their music lives on, echoing the madness and the price of temptation. So tell me, when does passion stop being power and start becoming poison? If you love diving into the untold, unfiltered truths of heavy metal's darkest secrets, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, because there's a lot more chaos left to uncover.